Welcome back to another episode of the High Level Human Podcast. I am your host. I am James McGee. This is episode 7. So I talk a lot about the FBI National Academy. I'm a proud alumni. I've said before, the school wasn't that hard. I made straight A's, so that should tell anybody anything that knows me about how hard it was. It was great. I'm not knocking it. It is very it's a very just great opportunity. It's just a really great place to go. Any law enforcement leader, I encourage you to go. The best part is the friends that you make and the network of people. And talk about some high level people. And I've talked about that. I've had several on the show already. Not only my class, it's every class. 15 years later, my wife goes, and I had one of her classmates on recently. Just wonderful organization. There's no way that I could have this podcast, call it High Level Human, and have high level humans and promote people who are, in my book, high level human beings doing really good things, and not have Chief of Police Steve Lewis. Steve is from the St. Louis area. He got his law enforcement start with St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department around the same time that I got my law enforcement start, early 90s, late 80s. He went to work for Chesterfield Police Department, which is a suburb, rose to the rank of assistant chief, and a couple years ago became the chief of police of Chesterfield. Steve is just a different level guy. He is he's a real dude. When I think of just dudes, Steve Lewis comes to mind. He is what I would consider in the law enforcement community would consider a cop's chief, a cop's cop. That guy lives and breathes for the men and women who not only work for him, but work for any agency and anything he can do to represent them. I mean, this man is on tons of boards, and I'll let him tell his story. Tons of boards and committees. He's currently on a fellowship in Washington, D.C. He's been there for a month. He's got 5 months left on active shooter policy. That's how respected this man is throughout the nation as a law enforcement leader. And I am so proud to call him my good friend. We have visited. I have went to St. Louis and visited with him. He is just a great guy, fun. He's a real dude. There's no other way to put it. He's just a real dude, and he's raw and he's real, but the man is as sincere of a human being and sincere of a cop and a leader as they come. So it is I'm so excited, such a great pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, Chief of Police, Steve Lewis.
Welcome to the High Level Human Podcast, a production of the James McGee Show. With your host, James McGee. He pulls no punches. He's in your face, and he keeps it real. Join him for candid discussions about life, leadership, and living the life of a high level human.
Are hot. So here he is, the man himself, Steve Lewis, my friend, brother. It is. I've been excited about this one for a couple of days, man. I've been like a little kid, and I am so excited to have you. I know you're busy. For you to take what you have going on, and we'll get to that for sure. With what you have going on, for you to take the time to visit with me and for our guests to hear your take on police work, life. You're just a high level guy. You're a different level guy, and I appreciate having you, man. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, brother. Anytime, you know that. I'm always there for you, just like you're always there for me.
Yeah. Well, you definitely are, and I'm going to tell a story about that later. So I talked a little bit about you. You started your police career with St. Louis Police Department, Metropolitan Police Department. There 5 years. What year did you start?
1989.
1989. Okay. I knew it was late 80s, early 90s. I started in 90. I knew we were all around the same time. Tom
right
Wells,
there,
Joe Collins were all around the same time. and you started with them, and then you led you to Chesterfield.
Yep. 5 years in the city of St. Louis, working in, we call it North City, which is one of our higher crime areas. Left there after 5 years, ended up in Chesterfield and did 24 years in Chesterfield.
And you left as the assistant chief.
I left as number 2.
So then you have been with Ellisville.
That is correct. For 7 years, I took a job with Ellisville Police Department. My chief was pretty up there in age, but he still wasn't willing to go anywhere. And I had a conversation with him, and at the same time, a neighboring jurisdiction head job came open, and I took the opportunity to pursue it and was lucky enough to get it. And the rest is history. Been there a little over 7 years as the police chief.
So I want you to talk a little bit about your career and just some, why you got in law enforcement and those things. But before we do that, I'm gonna, the listeners, I want them to get a little bit of understanding of my perception of Steve Lewis. If you ever watched the, I'm gonna keep it clean, Steve. So if you ever watched the movies Lethal Weapon, I compare Steve Lewis to Leo Getz. Leo, you are the Leo Getz of St. Louis. If anybody needs anything, they call Steve Lewis. Steve Lewis makes it happen. And, I feel like I've been told on that. I feel like, I have that ability and that talent. Man, guys like you, they're rare. And you always have a place when you're that kind of guy. You're a fixer. You make things happen. So tell us about how Steve Lewis became Steve Lewis.
Well, I'm gonna shoot you straight because that's what we do on your podcast. So number one, I grew up in the projects in the city of St. Louis. I tell people, I jokingly say I was the fastest little fat white kid you ever met, right? So I grew up very poor, single mom raised me. I grew up in an all black community, fairly high crime community. When I was about 7 years old, my mom and I were walking back from a bus stop, and we witnessed a triple murder. And during that triple murder, it took about 30 seconds, maybe a minute. We heard the police sirens coming. And when they showed up, I looked at them, and that was my first interaction with law enforcement in that positive way of, these guys were heroes coming to me. They were saving us. And I literally, as a 7-year-old, saw a guy die right in front of me. And I knew when those cops showed up, I was like, you know what? That's what I want to do. I want to be there for people in their time of need. It's why all of us get into this job. It's notwithstanding, we get to carry guns and drive fast too. But that was my instinct. That was what I wanted to do. Well, growing up in a rough area, you're either a fighter or you get to be friends with everybody. And I started out with getting to be friends with everybody, honestly. I made people laugh and I made people like me, and, I got along with everybody. That was what I was known for in the neighborhood. A few years down the road, I went ahead and learned to fight too, just because it's good to know. But, through my whole police career, I've lived by one mantra, and that is this: if I can do something for somebody, I'm going to do it. I walked a beat in probably the worst area. If you Google St. Louis City in 1993, we led the world in homicides. In my district, my beat, we led the city in homicides. So I tell people, my little 7 block by 7 block beat, where there were 2 of us patrolling, we handle more murders per capita than anywhere in the world. But the citizens and the communities in those neighborhoods, they love me. I walked a beat. I knew the people in my community. 90% of the people in that community were just very poor, and they had a lot of difficulty, just making ends meet. But they were good people. And 10% of the people in that community preyed on the other 90%. And I was there to help those people, to not be preyed upon and bring people to justice that were doing the bad stuff, if you will. But whenever I got a phone call, whenever I got a question, somebody needed something, they needed help. I've spent my whole career doing favors and not really asking many favors. I don't ask a lot of favors for myself because I don't need a lot of favors. God's blessed me. But when somebody calls me and they need something, a brother law enforcement officer especially, in my current role, in fact, I was there for a week and a half, and they were talking about wanting to bring a conference to St. Louis, but the money was a little tight and this was a little tight. I picked up the phone, made a phone call to a friend that's in the hotel business, and we worked it out. We're staying at one of the nicest, actually the nicest hotel in the St. Louis downtown area, and they were able to meet government cost, and everything else is thrown in, and we're going to go to a Cardinals game to boot. So that's how I roll. That's how my career has evolved.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, and we'll get back on your career, but I'm gonna tell you, the National Academy Conference, and you've gone a couple times. I go every year, and I will tell you this, and I said this before I knew that you had anything to do with it. The conference in St. Louis in 2016, as far as the training and the speakers, there is no comparison overall. They've had some good speakers, like last 2 years ago, or they had Jocko Willink, which was phenomenal speaker,
great speaker.
But overall, it was just St. Louis was. Then somebody tells me Steve Lewis arranged it. I'm like, well, I should have known Steve Lewis was the guy who arranged this. It was top notch. How do you know what is going to be, what people want to hear, who people want to hear, and how do you make them contacts? And because some of these guys
a great question,
expensive, and the budget isn't huge.
I'm going to let you in on my secret, and this is so I teach at Command College periodically. I teach supervisory classes for up and coming wannabe commanders and captains and even future chiefs. And there's a couple of things I tell people, and it carries through not just for law enforcement, but in general. Number one, the minute I meet somebody, I don't care what the scenario is, I ask for their number and I give them my number, and I stay in touch with them. When I know somebody's birthday, I write it down. When I know somebody's special occasion, I always keep those connections. People talk to me, people reach out to me because I tell them, look, if I can help you, I'll help you. So the national conference, it was my role to put on training, make connections and contacts with national level speakers. Well, I literally reached out to those people I met through my career. And by the way, and you know this, you're a high flyer. You rose high through your career, right? The people we meet at the bottom oftentimes end up on top, right? And when you treat people decent when they're entry level, I tell people I'm never the smartest guy in a room. I don't act like I am, and I'm never afraid to ask for help. And so when you've made those contacts, and people I knew who were a lowly patrolman, or somebody I know who was an up and coming actor or an up and coming sports figure, I stay in touch with them. I check on them. I ask them how they're doing. I ask them how their family's doing. And a lot of people think that it's, I'm doing it for me, and I'm not. I actually care about people. And that's the one thing in our career, 35 years, I haven't lost that. I truly give a crap about what happens to you and your family. You and I are a great example of that. We stay, and you're the same kind of person, right? We stay in touch.
Yes, I do.
Maybe we don't talk every day, but here's the thing. You damn well know you need something, I can help you. I'm your first phone call. And I've been that way my whole career. And so for that conference, I reached out to some generals that I knew. I reached out to some people in politics and national politics that I knew, and I explained to them what a big deal it was. And the National Academy really was a hallmark in my career. I think it was a hallmark in yours.
Yeah, it was.
And that's a big deal to me. So I did not want to let my brothers and sisters in the National Academy down when they came to St. Louis. And in all fairness, when the conference came to St. Louis, I was the person people said, hey, we need somebody to get stuff done. Lewis is our guy. So I try, I've failed now and again, but I don't fail because I don't try. I fail because it just isn't going to happen. It isn't in the cards. So,
Steve, that's a really great example. And yes, you and I do have a lot of similarities. I'm not Steve Lewis level, but I tell you what, but I want to be, and we do have a lot of similarities. And I'll tell you, when I started studying leadership formally, I learned some things, of course, that, man, I could do better. But one thing I did learn too is I learned some things I was doing right, and I wasn't really trying to do it. And the first thing that Jocko will teach you is building relationships. Well, I'll tell you this, when people ask me, hey, what was the biggest key building relationships? Two things that I always tell them, and I think you'll agree, is building relationships. And I volunteered for everything. Mm-hmm. When I was a young guy, I didn't have kids. Even when I had kids, when I could, if my supervisor walked in and said, "Hey, I need 2 guys, my hands are going up and I'm praying it's not a shit detail, but my hands going up before the detail is even announced because I'm going to volunteer," and didn't do it with a motive, but those kind of guys are the ones who do make it. But relationship building, and I realized that before I was even taught that, I was pretty good at building relationships, and I genuinely, just like you do, and I'm glad that you said that you didn't have a motive, but I know you don't. And people that know you don't have a motive, but you might need something one day. But I've never heard you try to get something for Steve Lewis. It's always for somebody else, just like you did for me. And I'll go ahead and tell that story because we're going to dive into Ferguson, the riots in Ferguson. We're going to dive into that in the second half of the show pretty in depth. But you were instrumental in that, and you were the incident commander, the chief of St. Louis County, John Belmore. It's a friend of yours. He lived in your city. You'll have to do something. I'll let you tell that story later. Mm-hmm. But a couple of years ago, we had in my town, we had an officer-involved shooting. Good shooting, but the recipe for what happened in Ferguson was there. And so, since it was one of our municipalities, if we had something happen, then we would take lead. The sheriff's office would take lead. So I would end up being the incident commander. So the sheriff called me in, and he said, "By tomorrow, I want a plan of action in case something does start here. I don't want to wait till it happens. I want a plan of action, and you will be the incident commander. Start putting it together." And of course, I'm like you. I'm sure that my 2 words is it's done. And I looked at him and I said, "It's done." I walked out and I'm sweating like, what in the fuck am I going to do? So I knew, I'm started thinking, man, first person I thought of, so I'm calling Steve Lewis. I called you and you said, "I'll be back with you within an hour." And probably about 30 minutes later, you called me and you had John Belmore lined up with me. He took, and this is a busy guy. He was still chief at the time.
Mm-hmm. He was.
And him and I forget who it was, but it was his go-to guy that was
Kenny Cox.
Yeah, great guy too. Both of them called me, stayed on the phone with me, and who had been my assistant, one of my captains at the time. We sat there on the phone in an hour, and he just just listened to him. And he had spoke at the conference that I was talking about. He spoke at that conference too. And I'm not impressed easy. And I don't know if you remember this, but I went to you afterwards and said, "Hey, I want to meet him. I just want to look at him and tell him, hey, he's a real dude." And he did a hell of a job. It was nationally known he did a hell of a job. And the things he gave us, some behind the scenes that people just don't see on the news. And that's what we're going to dive into. But yeah, I got a firsthand story. When you call Steve Lewis and say, "Leo gets things done," and you're my Leo gets, and I appreciate your friendship. Right, you really are that guy. So tell us some highlights from your career, if there's anything that stands out.
To be fair, you mentioned something, volunteering for stuff. So I am on every committee and I won't bore your listeners with all the stuff that I participate in. Highlights of my career: when I was a young police officer, because I cared about the community, I was actually involved in, and this is probably one of the biggest turning points in my career. As a young officer, we had a high-rise elderly facility where we were just having enormous calls for service. We actually had murders in this elderly facility. We had rapes, robberies. And I looked into it and I tried to figure out, well, what's going on? So what do? I talked to the people there. Turns out the government, in their infinite wisdom, while it was subsidized elderly living, they also put those persons who were former veterans but were dealing with drug addiction, and they put people who were recovering mental health and drug addiction people in that same facility. And I worked with a U.S. Senator at the time, Kit Bond, and we ended up changing national legislation and made it so that now nowhere in the country can someone who is under the age of 55, which I'm 55 now, it doesn't feel elderly, but nobody can be housed if you're under 55 with people in those communities. And so that started me on a career of problem solving. I've worked homicides. I'm on the major case squad board, the Greater St. Louis. I was a homicide investigator. I've done, high crime. I've handled active shooters. I've been involved, in several high profile incidents. We've had some, the civil disorder we've had in the St. Louis area. I was in and out of that, regularly. But it all meshes together. What I tell people is this: any cop that's done the job for any amount of time has done the same job and the same work I've done. I don't we got small agencies, large agencies. We're all out there doing the same thing, and it's my mantra and my message to the public as a whole, and that is this: I will challenge you right now and say more of the coppers out there doing the job are doing it the right way than any other profession as a percentage. And I truly believe that. So my career, and I know you wanted to talk about some of the stuff I've done, and I've put the cuffs on some bad people, and I've also done a lot of positive things and changing communities. But the reality is, I salute the men and women that are out there doing the job now, and those coppers that are out there protecting society, and this bullshit narrative that's out there right now. You talk about Ferguson, and I know John told you about a lot of the crap that he and his men and my men and we had to deal with during that entire time. But that resonated through the country, and we were kind of the tinderbox that started it. But you saw it in Baltimore. You saw it. You could go through the litany of cities where you've seen this, and even this recent shooting in Chicago, I think it was, that this narrative that the officers did something wrong by killing the guy who shot one of their policemen in a gunfight. Here's my message to you: our guys are going to win in a gunfight if we can, and every time. And that's what we should be doing. And that's what the people in our community want us to do. And so, my claim to fame in law enforcement is I back my officers. In Ferguson and in the 6 other civil unrest major issues we had since then, my number one thing is officer safety. And my guys are going home, and my men and women are going home to their families. And so I tell you, my claim to fame in law enforcement is I back my officers, and the proof's in the pudding. My department, like every department, we all looking for people. As of right now, I've got a waiting list for officers that want to come work for me in my agency. And that's not a Steve Lewis attribute. That's just, somebody that cares about their people. And I try and send that message on a daily basis.
I agree with it. There's a lot of things that I want to capitalize on that you said. But what you just said about, yes, there is a crisis in recruiting. I don't know if you saw Joe Collins and Tom Wells and I talking on Two Finger Tuesday, and I'm gonna say at the end, but I'm gonna tell you, you're invited to any and every Two Finger Tuesday from now on. Man, awesome. You'll be such a great addition to the panel we're putting together. But I'll tell you this: I do agree with there are a lot of challenges, but I had 2 weeks ago, I had a retired commander and a current chief from Vancouver, Washington. She's a retired commander from Portland. And she was an incident commander during the riots in 2020. Top-notch lady. Went to the NA with my wife. And she told me, Vancouver, they're full. And I think we have to stop just saying, no, there are some challenges. I'm not saying, but you have to look at yourself first. Everybody wants to say, nobody wants to work. Well, I think a lot of people, and I'm not just talking about law enforcement, I'm talking about just our labor force. I think there's two words missing when people say nobody wants to work. What they need to say is the last 2 words: for you. Nobody wants to work for you. Look at yourself. Tough statement,
but it's true, right?
No, I'm just saying that's what you have to look at as a leader, and quit just discounting. Oh, nobody wants to work. And it's like, you don't hear that as much in law enforcement as you just in the general labor force. Well, find out why they don't want to work. They have to have jobs. We have to evolve. There's so many things. There's challenges. There's so much remote work this generation. And I'm not a generation basher. You and I, first off, the people that generation bash is us. Well, we raised the little motherfuckers. You and I, you and I have kids in this generation. They turned out all right.
And my son's a detective for my former police department.
Your son's a high-level guy doing good things. So we have to, it's our job as leaders to find out what makes them tick, get them working, Yeah, we're not hiring robots, and they're not now. They're just different. They're going to do things. They're motivated by different things, and it's for us to figure out, or we're just not leaders. Anybody can just. So let's talk a little bit about that. You were a chief. You've seen a couple generations. What are some challenges with generations?
So if I can, and this will tie into your challenges for generation, I'm going to share with you a management philosophy that I've held for about 20 years now. I've been a commander for 22 of my last of 35 years. And I have a 3-prong management test that if everybody took this on, I think it would help our profession. My number one question when guys ask to do something, I'll give an example, these little beards here. I wasn't a fan of facial hair because I grew up under the generation, we didn't have facial hair in uniform. You can't put a gas mask on if you got facial. There's a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
So I developed a 3-prong test. They asked me a question. My first response is, does it meet the needs of our community? Because at the end of the day, we are there to protect and serve. And you cannot love that mantra, but I will tell you that at the end of the day, it has to meet the needs of our society and our community. So my number one question is, well, what you're recommending, does it meet the needs of our community? If I check the box that it does, my next question is, does it meet the needs of the majority of our officers? In other words, will the majority of our officers accept it and support it? If I check that box, my third question is always the same. Why am I not doing it? If it meets the needs of my community, it meets the needs of my officers, then my third question is, why am I not doing it? If the answer is something like, well, I just don't like it as a chief, or I don't think it's the way we should because back in my day we didn't, that's not valid for me. And so what I found was in the beards are perfect.
I'm smiling because I've got a comment I'm going to say in a minute, but yeah, I can't stand that fucking statement.
And to me, it's what's held us back as a profession, right? So with these beards, 10-second review. I told my guys, I'll give you beards, but as soon as I get a complaint from citizens that you look like shit, you're losing the beards and you never have a beard again.
Yeah, I'm against them. And my agency now has them, and I cringe. But you know what? The administration that's this same administration that I worked with, I don't blame them, and we were all against it. But
so why were we against them? We're against them because back in the day we didn't allow beards, and back in the day they didn't look good. Beards and tattoos and outer vest carriers, and I could go down a litany of things that we're against because we didn't come up with them. But when I looked at my community and I asked people, I walk my community, I visit all my businesses and I got a lot of businesses. I got 1.4 million people drive down my road every month in my community. So we're one of the busiest roadways in the region, a lot of businesses. And I talked to people and I asked them, you see our officers, you notice anything different? And several people said, yeah, their beard, they look great. They look more mature. Some of the officers felt more confident with those beards on their face. They were young pup looking kids, and then they had the beards, and long story short is, not only did I get no complaints, but all I got was accolades. And then I looked at the officers and this new generation, like it or not, you have to find what motivates them. And it sounds silly, but some of these little wins are what motivates them. It's these little gifts. You know what? Here's your, I don't agree with the 6th place trophy, Johnny Society, but I do understand, right, that we do have to give them little wins to make them feel valued. And so my number one complaint against beards, and it's every chief I've talked to, by the way, and 80% of our agencies in my region have allowed them, but 80% of the chiefs who said no, when I said why, their answer was, well, it just doesn't look good. Brother, let me just tell you, times have changed. I see a lot of shit that doesn't look good walking down downtown DC streets, and I don't agree with that. That the communities and society has accepted. So you got to have that mentality in dealing with this generation of law enforcement. Their motivations are different than us. I think their commitment's a little bit different, but I don't sell them short because some of them are smart as hell, and this technology they're using is 100%. Changing the game for law enforcement. So
I say it all the time, and some people in our generation gets mad at me when I say it, but I believe it. We can bust their balls all we want, We could talk about their work ethic. We can talk about all this shit. But these motherfuckers are smarter than any generation we've ever had. They've had information at their fingertips their whole life. They're very inquisitive. So it's our job to figure out how to manage them. And you said it right. It's our job to figure out how to manage them, those little wins. And that's why our administration here ended up doing it. And if you remember, I came a couple of years ago and had a young deputy with me who's a friend of mine. And he is he's from that generation, and he's a leader. And he told me one day, he said, "Why are you against beards?" I said, "I'm gonna tell you why. I'm against it because," and I said, "you're gonna realize when you have it, it's hard to manage. It's just like the job I just came from. They had Blue Jean Friday. Well, I hate Blue Jean Friday. First off, when the public comes to meet with you, they don't give a fuck what day it is. They expect a professional person. But I wasn't going to be the guy to come in and change it. And they'd ask me, "Why are you against it?" I said, "It's hard to manage. You're going to realize because there's some people that should not be wearing fucking blue jeans. They shouldn't.
Absolutely.
They don't wear the right ones. They don't wear nice ones. They wear some. It's just hard to manage." And I told him, and he told me recently, he said, "I understand what you're saying." He said, "Because we got some guys, because it's kind of like the broken windows concept. Some people are growing a beard and they're taking more pride in themselves and they're trimming them. Some people are growing a beard and now they're sloppy. They're not combing their hair.
Right.
It's just my stance is it's just hard to manage when you have a blanket policy like that. But I agree with you and every other leader that has.
You know what I found about that though, Jimmy? Is that same officer who his beard looks like shit, guess what else looks like shit? His uniform.
Everything. Yeah.
Guess what else looks like shit? His shoes. So rather than manage to the group, I say hold our people accountable.
I agree with that.
For what they look like and what they're doing. Because I tell my guys,
this same deputy, that's his argument. It's like, hey, what about the big fat ones we got?
Absolutely. I mean,
what about the ones that look like shit in uniform?
Just look like shit in general, right?
People that look like shit are going to look like shit.
And the other thing I tell my guys, which is more important to me, is this: when someone calls the police and they need you, I'm going to be one of the few, and I'm a weird chief because I'm more like a road guy, I think, than a chief. But I would tell you this: they don't give a shit what you're wearing when you show up, right? They care that you care what their problem is and that you're going to help them fix their problem. Now, I agree. There are times when I want you to look presentable all the time. I truly do. But I also let things slide sometimes based on the concept that society has changed, whether we like it or not. And at the end of the day, you can have your beard a little out of trim and your mustache a little long and tattoos on your arms and look a little rougher than cops of our days did. But when you get to that call and you handle that call and you care about that victim and you care about the managing that scenario, at the end of the day, when I get the phone call from the victim, what they say is, "Man, your officer took the time to care for me. Your officer's you run a department of people that give a shit. Not, man, that guy looked like crap," right? Usually the people throwing the look like crap comments are old guys like us because we think they look like crap, and they do, but not typically the victims and the people who we're serving. So I'm with you 100%.
You're right. I haven't heard one person say anything about it. I'm getting used to it, but I'm not. But I agree with anything that works, and if it works, it works. So I want to dive into a little bit in a second about Ferguson, the incident in Ferguson, and I'll tell you spent a lot of time there. So when we came, I think in probably 17 or 18, my wife and I came up there for a UFC fight. And we met you. What was the name of the brewery? Starts with an S. Famous place over there.
Yeah, it was the one. It wasn't the. It was Anheuser-Busch's competitor. It was shit. I can't remember right now. It'll come.
It's a family-owned place. It's a
Schlafly's.
Schlafly's, great place. We met you there, and so you're telling us, hey, what do y'all want to see here? Do y'all want to go to the Arch? I want this. And she says, I want to go to Ferguson. And you said, it's that way. Have fun. I've spent enough time there.
I was pretty close to the time still.
So you spent a lot of time there. And before we get into that, I want to tell you, look, I understand you are a sitting chief, and I'm no longer there, and I can say what the hell I want to say. And so I don't expect you to say a lot, but I got something before we dive into this, because we talk about this generation. You want to talk about, and we can, like I said, we can bust our balls on a lot of things. Well, let me tell you, this is what pisses me off about when we get into race. This is what pisses me off about the automatic stereotype of cops being racist and just wanting to get out there and kill somebody. Let me tell you why it pisses me off. You and I know this. First off, we have kids in this generation. And I will go into this saying, I get it and I understand. There was a time in our country, and you and I have seen such a progression through the times about just such a growth with society. But there was a time in our country that I think there was cops that did police by race. There was a time in our country. We're not proud of it. We cannot change it. But this is what really I get passionate about. We have the least racist generation of men and women
in the history of our country.
In the history of our country, the men and women who are on the streets, and you can tell I get pissed off when I talk about this, they don't fucking deserve it. They do not deserve every time they do something for it to automatically be considered race. They didn't do that. They should not be paying for something that a cop did in the 60s. That should not happen. And what I'm happy about is there are still leaders like you, and I'm going to use this platform that I have to defend them. There are leaders like John Belmore. There are leaders like the district attorney that y'all had, and I don't know if he's still the DA. That guy gave one of the absolute best articulations and of why that he made the decision that he made. And that guy's top-notch guy in my book. We have to have more people like that, because these men and women are, I'm not saying it never happens, but I can tell you the leaders that we have, like you, and the leaders that are out there, they're policing their own more than ever. There's cameras. There's so many checks and balances. So just whatever you would like to say on that.
I've got a lot to say. I'm gonna spit it, brother.
I know.
So number one, we're gonna pontificate on this a lot, and I'm gonna steal something John Belmore used to say, because it makes more sense, and it'll put everything you just said in a nutshell.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question, Brother James. You've been a cop for a long time. You've done some real policing, right? If you were going to wantonly kill black people, like if you were going to, like you're a cop, you have cops that just want to kill a black person, right? What better place to do it than, I don't know, a riot? A riot where they're burning down buildings, where they're destroying police cars. So if law enforcement wanted to hurt people, right? A riot's kind of like the best place to do it, right?
Yeah.
Do you know how many people were shot by police during the Ferguson riots? Multiple riots? Take a guess, brother.
I don't think any.
0. Do you know how many people were injured by the police? And I mean physically, purposefully injured. 1. You know what happened in that case? A gal got her eye shot out by a rubber bullet because her boyfriend drove into a crowd of policemen trying to strike them and run them over, and they fired upon the vehicle and actually struck her. And she actually said, screaming at him, I told him not to do that. The point of this issue is this: we get accused of wantonly going out and shooting young black men at an alarming rate. That statistic is 100% false, untrue, misrepresented, and a narrative that doesn't fit reality. Number 2, if we were that way, if law enforcement really didn't care about the black community, you know what we would do? Quit policing completely in the black community. Watch what happens. And unfortunately, you're seeing some of the ramifications of defunding the police and depolicing and pulling people out of those communities. And now all of a sudden, a lot of those cities are screaming, "We want police back. We need the help."
Yeah, it's going on. It's going on in Portland right now.
Portland right now. Cops are inherently good. I'm going to say it again. Police officers are inherently good. That is a fact. And unfortunately, when we have a few that make mistakes, either purposefully or not purposefully, but unfortunately, when that happens, it gets all the press. But what doesn't get the press is the fact that we hold those men and women accountable for their actions. In fact, if I remember correctly, the year before Ferguson, it was a big conversation about all these unarmed black men being shot and killed by police. The total number the year before was 9. That's 9. That included 5 who went for weapons, who were reaching for weapons and were shot. It included 2 that were shot without weapons. In both of those cases, the officers were charged and convicted of crimes. And there were a couple others that were questionable, like were open for debate. That's it, 9. That same year, I'm pretty sure there was 7,500 murders that year in the black community.
Mm.
The idea that police are the primary cause of the black community's problems at the hands of violence is absolutely inaccurate. And I have a number of civic leaders. I have a gentleman, I'm a TD Stubblefield. He's a black pastor at a Baptist church. He's one of my mentors. He's somebody I look up to and I talk to through Ferguson. I went and talked to his church, an all black church, and stood before them as the only white law enforcement guy and talked to them. They had 200 members there that were from the church in Ferguson where they buried Michael Brown. And I let them ask me any question. And it was an interesting conversation, brother, let me tell you. But at the end of the day, I explained to them this. They couldn't tell by looking at me that I grew up near the Darst Webby housing projects. They couldn't tell by looking at me that I grew up as poor as can be. But when I asked them, when I walked in the room initially, what were their thoughts of me, they admitted, because we had a great conversation, that, yeah, they were prejudiced against me. They thought I was just another cop. And I said to them, you're doing what you accuse us of doing at an alarming rate. And you're not having that conversation. And TD, and it's what I've lived by, and it's helped us in our communities. TD would talk about, look, we have to get back to this capital in the bank, right? We have to work with our communities and build up this capital so that we need to take a loan out. We've got money in the bank to loan against it, right?
Absolutely. No, public trust, yes, 100%.
Public trust.
Our share. So
you know how we have to fix that?
So
you know what we need to do though, brother, and you're doing it? And I've preached this 100%. Quit giving away the narrative in law enforcement. We have to stop allowing the wrong people to steal our narrative and tell a lie and tell it as a fact and tell a story. It's not true. You look at the Chicago shooting. I don't know what happened, but here's what I do know. I know they pulled over a guy for a lawful reason. I don't care if you don't like the lawful reason. The lawful reason was there. I know they walked up to the vehicle and they made contact. And I know that subject shot a police officer, not shot at. He hit a police officer. And I know every officer on the scene returned fire. That's what I know are facts. To paint that as anything other than what it is, which is a tragedy, right? It's a tragedy. We don't want to take lives. We do not.
Nope.
But if you point a gun at a policeman, right, your expectation should be that that policeman is going to do what he can to go home to his family that night. And I don't care about race. I don't care about religion. I don't care about anything else. You want to really change the world? You want to shock the world? Take race out of everything. Quit relying on race as the determining factor on anything. Let's look at the facts of every case and determine those cases based on merit, because I agree with something you said. I've never believed more firmly that our law enforcement officers are the least prejudiced and the least, and by the way, if they wanted to be prejudiced, they can't get away with it. My kid said something to me.
Yes, exactly. They're not, but if they were, they can't fucking do it.
My kid said something to me that laughed. It hurt my feelings a little bit. He'd been a cop for 2 years. And he kind of says to me, "Hey, Dad," because I've done some police work in my day, and I'm gonna leave it at that. And he said to me, and he's heard the stories. He said to me, "Dad, you could never be a cop today." And I go, "What are you talking about? I am a cop." He goes, "You're not a cop. You're an administrator. Number one." I go, "Well, why couldn't I be a cop today?" He said, "Dad, I take a piss and it's on video, basically." He goes,
Yeah, he
"My
has a
gun
point on that. He does have a point on that.
my gun can't leave my holster. My lights can't turn on my car. I can't get out of my vehicle and talk to someone when it's not recorded." He
Yeah.
goes, "I know how you used to treat people. And I know, I treated everybody fairly. My claim to fame was I treated you fairly till you gave me a reason not to.
Yeah.
And then we're putting the hammer down, right? We're doing the job because I'm going home every day." And we didn't always talk to people nicely. It was a different time, right?
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, these cops have more eyes on them than anywhere in the history of any time in our profession.
They
So
do.
let's say you had a guy that was wantonly racist that wanted to do something bad. I'm going to catch him. I review their body. I don't personally. I have commanders that review their body cameras weekly, review their car stops weekly. We do audits continuously. And in those audits, what do we look for? Signs of inappropriate conduct. I'm going to know when one of my officers drops the N bomb. Guess what? He's getting fired. This concept that guys are running around here, cursing people and doing this, it doesn't exist. It's not. It's a false narrative in most agencies. 99% of the agencies, I truly believe, it's just not there.
And when it does, you're right. When it does happen, you have administrators that are dealing with it. I'm not saying it never happens,
Sure.
but what I'm saying is it's not a common practice.
Right.
It's isolated when it does, and it's dealt with. We had, probably 15 years ago, we had one. It was a sergeant. He punched a young black male that was handcuffed and called him the N word. He was fired. He was arrested. He was prosecuted.
Wait. Can you say that again, James? He what? He was held accountable?
He was fired. He was arrested and prosecuted.
As he should have been.
As he should have been. And there wasn't a policeman out there that says he shouldn't. It wasn't like policemen weren't rioting because he was arrested. There's a line that you don't cross. He crossed a line. He was held accountable. And that's how it is. And no, you're definitely you're definitely right. And these young men and women are so lucky to have leaders that have leaders like you, because people are not. That's why people are not leaving your department. That's why people are coming to your department, because they want to be supported more than anything. And you're like me. We have our ways. We're not always the easiest guy, but one thing I guarantee you, and I have visited with people that work for you, they're going to say that Steve Lewis cares. And of all the things that they're going to say they didn't like about James McGee, they're going to say James McGee cared about me, and we weren't getting fucked over on his watch. And that is a really big deal. So before we dive into your role in Ferguson, I want to talk a little bit about use of force, and I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna just put it out there. And obviously you were very in depth, know everything about this incident. I hate that any young man died.
Check.
I hate that Michael Brown died. I hate a life was lost. It was a waste, complete waste. Michael Brown died because of Michael Brown's actions, and it's unfortunate. And I wish he would have not made those decisions that day. So what I talk about in use of force, and I do want your opinion on this. So where we're missing, because what Ferguson was one of the big ones, and it was debated at the end whether the officer should. And I've decided if you agree, I'm not saying the officer's name. His name has been said enough, and I said it the other day, and I regret saying it. I'm not saying it. You know him. He's a good guy, and we're going to talk about that at the end too, about how everybody thinks that policemen are treated differently. Well, they are, in the opposite way.
Correct.
So
I've got a funny story. Remind me to tell you about the news story
We'll
that
talk.
I
Yeah,
personally
I
dealt
definitely
with.
want to talk about that because there's some things John said that made sense that I want to bring up at the end too. So my point is this: we can debate the actual shooting of Michael Brown, but where we have to do is reverse it and look at the beginning, and that's his is not any different than every other one that we can name. It started with one thing:
Failure to comply.
failure to comply with lawful law. I'm gonna say it one more again: lawful orders. Policemen have the right under the Constitution that when it's lawful, they have a right to stop people, and it was lawful. It was a lawful stop. He issued lawful orders. So that's where we can sit here and people, the opposition will say, well, the end doesn't justify the means. Well, you know what? I thought what we're trying to do is prevent people from dying. If we're going to prevent people from dying, then uh, we have to get people complying with lawful orders. And hey, you know what? If the policeman's wrong, it's on video.
Mm-hmm.
Then do it. Do your. I'm not saying you should just comply and never complain. Question it later. And also, it's that initial 30 seconds that's very important. That's when the policeman's more on guard to let him at least figure out what's going on and then ask those questions. But do you agree that it starts with that one thing commonly?
So, in the Ferguson case specifically, in the Michael Brown shooting, number one, the officer received notice of a strong arm robbery that had occurred. The description was of a large black male and a small black male. And basically, they stole cigarillos, they stole cigars, right? Walking down the middle of the street from that area, holding a pack of cigarillos, was Michael Brown and his number two there, right?
Mm-hmm.
The officer approached them. Now, there were probably some tactical errors, right? There's some room for growth in the tactics because I believe he like we've done, like I did 100 times, 1,000 times in my career, stupidly probably roll up to somebody on the set and say, hey, get on the sidewalk, right? Get out of the middle of the street. And then you notice, hey, wait a minute. I need to make a further contact with this guy. Hey, where'd you get those? What are you doing? And then it escalates, right? But here's the issue. And you hit it on the head. In overwhelming majority of these cases, you have a circumstance where the officers are giving a lawful direction, be it in a car stop, be it on a pedestrian check, whatever it is, and that is then driven out of control by the suspect, the subject, 99% of the time, and that's what ends up happening with this case. What's worse in this case is we had a series of horrible mistruths. The hands up, don't shoot came from Ferguson. That is 100% inaccurate. It never happened. He was never shot in the back. He never turned around and raised his hands. In fact, and I know this for a fact, during the Ferguson investigation, they did over 90 something interviews. There was no one who was an eyewitness or remote eyewitness who reported anything other than the way it rolled out as reported by the officer. Bob McCullough speaks on that repeatedly. Number two, the officer, the physical evidence at the scene was consistent with the officer's accounting of how he was assaulted, wrestled for the firearm, had to discharge his weapon, and how the subject charged him, and the resulting physical evidence, that's the medical examiner's report and further examination, showed that everything matched to what the officer said happened. Where we went awry is the national media portrayed a hands up, don't shoot narrative. They talked about why his body lay there for 4 hours. What they don't talk about is, because I spoke with the medical examiner's office about this, the fact that when they were at the scene, and I know many people that were at the scene, when they were at the scene and they began to do their investigation, the people in the Canfield apartments began coming out, and there were shots fired, multiple shots fired at not only the officers, but at the medical examiners, who were then had to remove themselves from the hot zone, if you will, and couldn't remove the body for a lengthy period of time.
See, I didn't know that until that conference when John Belmore
Right.
spoke. I did not know the shots that y'all were taking.
That then fast forward, I got to get this news thing in. So I am very well known with the media in St. Louis. I was a PIO for 20 something years on our homicide investigation squad. Was until I became a chief, the chief PIO for the homicide investigation group. So every murder in St. Louis the major case squad investigates, I was in charge of running the core group of PIOs. So I know all the media people. At that event, the media person on Channel 5 News stood in front of the officer's house and reported live from his residence, which then created a situation where people went to that residence and put his pregnant wife, who was also an officer, in direct jeopardy. Now, you want a kick in the nuts, brother? Here's the kick in the nuts. I received a call that evening from that news producer, and they said, Steve, I need your help, brother. I go, what's going on? Well, you know our reporter who reported on this? I go, check, I do. Yeah. He goes, I know we screwed up, but there are people that are now sending death threats his way. Can you please put police presence at his house 24/7 for the next few days, because he's getting threats and he's scared? And I said, let me get this straight. The reporter who stood live in front of the officer's house at a time when that officer had to make a life or death decision, and who reported from the officer's house, creating serious death threats, like legitimate death threats against that officer, that reporter got a couple phone calls from people who said, well, you should be the one killed, and you want me to put 24-hour police presence at his home? And he goes, yeah, when you put it that way, I get how it sounds, but I still need it. And I said, you know what? We'll do it. You know why we'll do it? Because we're police officers and we're law enforcement and we're professional. And that's what we do. Now, yep. I will also add, John Belmore lived in my town, and I contacted him, and he had county officers assisting, but I put 24 hours patrol in front of his house, in front of his neighborhood during that time, because he, like a lot of the county commanders and people that were higher profile, were getting doxxed. Their credit was getting stolen. Their identities were being stolen. Their families were being threatened. He, his wife, his mother, and his daughter all lived in my town. And so we provided any assistance. His daughter taught in a school in that area. We provided any and all assistance we could to protect he and his family while he was out there dealing with front row rioting, front row destruction, and putting himself and his family in harm's way. And why? Ultimately, because the media decided this was a tinderbox narrative that they wanted to jump on. The DOJ, by the way, who went after the Ferguson Police Department, they looked for all kinds of bad stuff. And I know this for a fact. I know this happened because I know somebody in the room. The discussion with the Attorney General of the United States at the time was, sir, this officer did nothing wrong. We have written a brief on this. We've got FBI agents doing interviews. We've done everything, the forensic on this. This officer did nothing wrong. And his direction was, well, there's got to be something wrong with that police department. Find it. DOJ, little story. Tom Jackson was the chief of Ferguson. I knew Tom pretty well. Yeah. Tom's told this story 100 times, so I can repeat it. The information came out, the video came out of Michael Brown strong-arming the convenience store where he stole the cigarettes from, cigarillos. What happened was he just grabbed them. He was high as a kite. He was high on marijuana. He grabbed these cigars. He was walking out. The shop owner went to him. basically Mike Brown stiff armed him and pushed him away. And Mike was a big kid. I mean, he was a big guy. And they had that video. And Tom Jackson and the city of Ferguson got subpoenas, or I'm sorry, got FOIA's, Freedom of Information Act requests from the national news media for that video. Tom contacted the DOJ and said, hey, we're getting these requests. If you guys seal it, if you guys say it's part of the investigation, we can seal it and we can deny these requests. But my attorneys are saying we have to abide by our laws, Sunshine Law in the state of Missouri. We have to abide by the Sunshine Law. We have to give them these videos. It's going to incite everyone. It's going to be reckless. You know, they see this video and they see us releasing it. It's going to be a problem. The DOJ did not respond day 1, 2, 3, and 4. On day 5, their attorney said, look, we have to release the video because if we don't, we are getting sued and we will lose. We have no defense to not releasing this video. They released the video. Within an hour of them releasing the video, the DOJ released a statement saying it was incomprehensible that Tom would release the video, that it was against any and all common sense, it would incite the people, and that they would look at Ferguson for doing this. They didn't have time to respond. They could have easily squashed that, right? They could have easily quashed that incendiary video, which, by the way, the release of the video created a second wave of rioting at that time frame in that area. You know, it was literally an entire narrative that changed our country, right? You know, I was in Alabama at the time on vacation when Ferguson hit. And a friend of mine was the commander of special ops for St. Louis County. And he called me and he said to me, Stevie, we just got our asses handed to us. We did not expect this. Another local chief was a good friend of mine. We were sending cars up there and he said, Steve, when you send your guys, put as many of them in one car as you can. Because we lost 15 cars tonight for them trashing them, burning them, breaking them, right? It was out of control. But the second night, and John would tell you this, and Kenny Cox would tell you this, and all the guys that dealt with this would tell you this, they were taking control. And then the media got a hold of it, and the media pushed this narrative, and all of a sudden you had all of these outside agitators taking trains, planes, and automobiles to Ferguson and creating the summer of hell that the men and women in blue and brown had dealing with that situation.
Yeah, that's a lot, man. I'm appreciate you going that in depth, and let me tell you that that's a horrible situation. It just, when it could be prevented. The fact of, and correct me if I'm wrong, the hands up, don't shoot lie that the guy that was with him. Am I right by saying that was dispelled very early on?
With the same day.
The same day. So the same day. And that, I'm sure it was released on the police end or somebody's end, but the same day that was proven, not speculated, but proven to be a complete lie. And it was not reported. And this, because it was catching on, because it was making.
They had shirts printed up, brother.
Yeah, it was making.
The next day they had shirts printed.
Yeah, hands up, don't shoot did not exist. It was a complete lie from the beginning. The guy admitted it was a lie, and it stayed alive because of the mainstream media.
I think it's still alive today, right? I mean, I think
the saying
there's
is still alive,
never been a debunking of that, national debunking of that statement.
Not by the people that it should be done. People like
Correct.
me and you, and small platforms that, you know, I know you had your radio show, small platforms that, you know, that we have, but for the national media, no, absolutely it has not been, and it should be. Let's touch on, before I want to get a little more into the aftermath and some more of what your role and your department's role was, but we'll talk about the aftermath for the police officers, because there's this another false narrative that policemen are treated differently when they kill someone. Well, I'm here to tell you they absolutely are treated differently. and not in the way that people think. First off, a policeman's main tool, main everything is a gun. First thing his gun is taken away. He may, most departments now issue another weapon, but his gun's taken. So what happens when you take somebody's gun? They automatically feel like they did something wrong. Immediately upon him shooting someone, he is, a policeman. And look, investigation should be thorough. It should be done like this. But you are a person who is sworn to uphold the law. You make arrests every day, and then next thing you know, your rights are being read to you. So you're treated like you did something wrong from the beginning. Something John, I will never forget, and I have carried this torch since he said it. People are demanding that that officer's name should have never been released, because people, well, if it was a regular citizen, absolutely not. When have you known that a citizen who was not charged, who was not formally charged, their name being released? When does that happen? Doesn't.
You're not allowed to.
You're not allowed to. So why a policeman? They're demanding the name. And then this officer, after everything, was a year later. Was it almost a year whenever it was a no true bill came back?
Yes. Yeah. It was a year later.
So it was found that he did his job, followed his training, and he was still forced to resign. So now, or I don't know if he was forced to resign or if
he was resigning was a result of the threats on his life.
So
he could never
no
be
longer have the job. Yeah, he could no longer have the job that he wanted. Last time you and I talked, and like I said, we're not saying his name. Last time you and I talked, we talked about him. He was selling cars.
Mm-hmm.
I hope he's doing well, and I hope if he happens to listen to this, my thoughts and prayers are for you. I hope your family's doing well. His wife's probably not a policeman anymore either, right? Two people who did the right thing. Yes, so cops are treated different, but not in the way that people make it out to be.
No, you're spot on. I mean, that, there is no here's what, when I changed my internal affairs policies, okay, we have an officer bill of rights in the state of Missouri, but I had this years and years before, even going back to when I was a number two, Ed and I and the chief at the time, Ray Johnson. We always said this: if you look at the way we treat police officers, they are not afforded the same courtesies that the criminals are afforded. They're not.
100%.
You look at those policies and the Garrity rights and the, you're not allowed to plead the fifth because you're demanded under Garrity. You have to answer administrative questions, right? And so we always held in our internal affairs investigations, any police involved shooting, for example, that you treat the officer with at least the same courtesy and credibility you would give to the common criminal, right? And that didn't happen in this case. How often, when have they ever stood in front of a suspected shooter's home, in front of his house, before he was charged, before anything happened, and dime out where he lived and who he was and show his picture and his family? I mean, it's absolutely incredulous. It's so wrong that it flies in the face of common sense. And the other thing is, and this is, I go back to this in our profession, brother, we let them get away with it. We let them get away with it. We have allowed.
We get bullied. We let them bully us into releasing names and doing
100%.
Yeah.
And I get it. Again, I'm a sitting police chief. I wanted to hire the officer. I was contacted, but because his attorney was my attorney, and a friend, and he said, what do you, can this guy work again? And I told him, I don't see it. And here's why. You bring him on my department, I'm a 100 officer department. Where's he going to go? The people aren't going to know that. And then they're going to be out in front of our building, and they're going to still attack him. They're going to set him up. This poor kid's life was absolutely destroyed
for doing his job,
for literally protecting society.
Yeah.
And we've said it before, but I'll reiterate it. It's a tragedy that it happened. It is absolutely unfortunate. And it's funny, if people listen to this podcast and the national media happen to grab a piece of this, they wouldn't grab any of the parts where we say it's a tragedy. It's horrible that it happened. We feel for the family, even to this day, we feel for the family who loses a son, even if the son precipitated the actions that happened. I don't care. I don't want a mother to lose her son ever.
I do not.
But that would never get played. But at the end of the day, the responsibility lies, unless the officer's wrong. And in this case, and especially in this case, when you had a Department of Justice who wanted that officer found guilty, right? They would have wanted nothing more. I believe the sitting president at the time said Michael Brown could have been his son, right? And I'm going to say one thing that's not going to sit well, but there was another turning point in our country as a result of Ferguson, and people lose this. We had a black president running our country. Mm-hmm. We had a person in the Oval Office who could have come out and said, stop, take a step back. Do not make this about race. And could have led our country in a different direction, honestly. I'm heartbroken to this day. And I have this discussion with my black friends and police officers that I've been friends with for 35 years that are in the black community that kind of feel the same way I do. And that's this. We have allowed the major media to pull us apart. We've allowed the politicians to pull us apart. And you had an opportunity there for leadership and the ability of someone with a lot of clout to say, stop. I want to go there, but I don't want to go there with the microscope of injustice. I want to go there with the microscope of justice. And the difference is this. I don't want to look for what's wrong and why it had to be racist. I want to look for what happened and determine if it was a problem. And that's what we didn't see. We didn't see DOJ coming there. We didn't see the questions being, let's see what happened and what are the facts. What we saw was a jump to cries of racism and cries of injustice before that was week one. But you can't know the facts. And I say it in every case. I don't care which one it is. I don't care if it's the George Floyd case. I don't care if it's the Eric Garner case. I don't care which case it is. I say, if the officers did something wrong, I want them gone. I want them held accountable. But how many murders have you handled probably in your career or been in command of?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hundreds, thousands?
Hundreds.
Yeah. How many have you solved in one day where you convicted the guy in a day?
Not very many, but when it's a policeman, they expect it expect it done. They don't, and if a policeman gets due process, it's called cover up.
Right.
And for the public, it's called due process. For policemen, it's called cover up. That is not okay. Policemen have every right for the due process of anybody else. They should not be treated 1 ounce different, and they are. So, like John Belmore told us in 2016, any law enforcement administrator that's listening to this right now, do your officers a favor if they're involved in a shooting, use of force incident. Do not release their name. You do not have to. You would fight to the death. That is a hill that you as an administrator should die on, because they should have the same treatment as any other citizen. It's detrimental to their family, to their life. Look at this officer. That's why we won't say his name now. He deserves to live a normal, he'll never have a normal life, but he didn't deserve any of that. But more than anything, he didn't deserve to be blasted, and his family to just be blasted during this investigation. He deserved a thorough, non-biased investigation like everybody else, and he did not. In some ways, he did not get it. Thankfully, there were leaders like the DA. There were people like you, and that's what I want to close with is you. What was you and your personal involvement? You did talk about what the stuff in y'all city, because like John lived there, what y'all did, but he did not. Thankfully, he had people like y'all, but he didn't deserve that. So what was your agency and your role in this and
So
aftermath?
as a commander, I was not on the ground in Ferguson. I went to Ferguson, but I wasn't on the ground. I was in the command post, the intel post. And we worked, all the chiefs or all the captains and chiefs in the region. We all took turns working overnight. That was a 24-hour ops center that we ran through the St. Louis County Emergency Operations Center. We had an ancillary location. So St. Louis is divided. We're a weird community. We've got the city of St. Louis is their own police department, St. Louis County Police Department, and then in St. Louis County we have 66 municipal police agencies. So we have a lot of different police agencies. Ferguson is in North St. Louis County. My community was in far west St. Louis County. Pretty big county St. Louis County is, or a couple million people.
Really big, yeah. It's a really big county.
So we, my officers, I sent 6 officers a day. We specially trained officers in civil disturbance response, CDRT training. So I sent six people a day, every single day for months. I sat in a command post. The first, gosh, I don't know how long. I don't even remember how long it took. It was a lot where we just worked. We were prepared. I advised. I talked to the guys, the boots on the ground commanders. So to give you a scope of who really ran the show, St. Louis County and the Missouri Highway Patrol. Those were the commanders that were in charge and boots on the ground. So any other commander that tells you that they were boots on the ground, they may have been periodically because we all, took our turn helping out.
Yeah.
Because those guys needed to sleep, right? They needed rest. But St. Louis County, Missouri State Highway Patrol were the boots on the ground commanders, frontline, working 18 hours a day, and my hat's off to them all.
They did a good job. Y'all did a hell of a job.
And we backed them up. And I will tell you this, my role, probably the biggest thing that I did to help the cause, was I was a sounding board for the commanders there. We talked a lot about what you're going to do. Kurt Frizz, he's the current chief of, right now he's the chief of the St. Charles County Police Department, but he was a commander of SWAT at the time. Another colonel, he's a deputy chief in St. Louis County now, Brian Ludwig, was in SWAT at the time. All these guys, Mike Durkis was the commander of special operations. Those guys spent, I can't tell you how many nights they spent on the ground. Missouri Highway Patrol, I'm not going to go into the politics that occurred at our state, but our governor, I will tell you, absolutely did not help the situation because he played politics. I was in the Clayton command post a night when we were expecting mass riots, and I don't remember which iteration it was because we literally all, I can't tell you how many nights everybody in the region dealt with Ferguson. And the closer you were to North County, like the Florissant police chief and the Hazelwood police chief and all those guys were ring cities to Ferguson. They were involved and they were boots on the ground. Their officers were there. And so we were backfilling those guys. But at the end of the day, I had 6 officers a day standing on a skirmish line, riot shields, riot batons, pushing back protesters, some lawful, some not lawful. We lost cars, broken windows. I had officers there the night that 2 officers were shot on the line. One of my officers was standing next to one of those officers. So, they're on the front line. It is what it is. But, that was what they were put into. And, civil disturbance, we just had, then after Ferguson, every time there was an incident, I think Baltimore was the next one. It was back on, right? City, things were burning. And the weird thing about Ferguson that's crazy, people don't realize is, relatively speaking, comparatively, it was a very small area. Like it's funny, but Ferguson happened. People who aren't from St. Louis don't realize Ferguson was a surprise city for us that happened in. The majority of Ferguson was actually decent. It wasn't.
Yeah, I'm grinning for a reason. I'll tell you why in a second.
Okay, and my only comment is that the actual ground zero there, you're measuring in a few blocks. I mean, it's not all that craziness, all the destruction, all that, and that's why we weren't all, it wasn't like it was all hands on, but
Mhm.
but it wasn't like Baltimore where you're talking square miles, right? This was literally blocks.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I want to defend the city of Ferguson a little bit. Because that story I told about you telling us, "Hey, it's that way, have fun." You also told us you're not going to be very impressed.
Right.
It's not Ramadi. It's not
No,
Fallujah. It's a regular town,
it
and
is.
I compared. There's a town that I live right next to, Westlake, and that's what my wife. She tells that story quite often about what you told us, and she tells people, "Hey, it's like going to Westlake. It's not. This was a regular. We went there. There's a little there Ferguson Brewery. Really like that place. I've
Right.
been there a couple
Yeah.
of times. It's a regular place. So I think that what also they did the city itself got a bad rap, and it's not a bad city. It doesn't seem like it's a very it's not an affluent suburb. There
No,
are
no,
some
no.
affluent
It's your
suburbs
middle
like it.
class,
Yeah,
you know,
it's just a regular blue collar city,
diverse community.
diverse community with good people.
Absolutely.
So
And that's
yeah,
the
I don't want
horrible.
to paint Ferguson as a war
No,
zone. It's not.
no, it's a good, you hit it on the head. It's not even in the top probably 20 of the St. Louis region's high crime communities. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just not. It just happened to happen outside a subsidized apartment complex in a rougher area. But if you told me, if you said, Steve, I need you to list 20 places where we're going to have riots and police shooting and riots, Ferguson wouldn't have made our top 20 for most people. It's not that community. And go back to the media, they literally portrayed it like it was Somalia, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly. That's exactly.
you'd have
Yeah.
thought you were in Mogadishu.
Hmm.
And the reality is, it wasn't. Now, I won't minimize because I had officers, like I said, on the line
Yep.
daily. It was scary. I mean, so John and the county guys will tell you they drove the Bearcat, our SWAT vehicle,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And I want to say they talked about thousands and thousands of rounds being fired at them. Thousands, not tens, not hundreds.
Yeah.
During all
That
of the
wasn't reported
Ferguson.
on the news.
Oh no. It's kind of funny because they rescued so many people. I mean, the job that police department, the job those police departments did, all of those North County police agencies, St. Louis County being the main one, and even the Missouri Highway Patrol, the line officers, the job they did, and it goes back, about an hour and 15 minutes ago, we had this comment, but that goes back to they were taking thousands of rounds of fire. They did not shoot one person.
And
It
when they
was
could have
nighttime.
every
Oh my
single
gosh.
day.
Every day there could have been, and probably, I mean, they had so many guns pointed at them. It's silly. And the reality, and I'll give John credit for that statement, but it really resonated with me. And that is this: if you wanted to wantonly kill somebody, where better location than a riot where you're taking thousands of rounds of fire? It's already been portrayed as a war zone. Hey, who
Yeah.
and they had enough command and control. They had enough discipline on the line that even when officers were scared, and by the way, people, we get scared. You're put in that situation. Those officers standing on the line were nervous. We had some officers lose their jobs at that time because of stress and their inability to respond appropriately. There made some national news of some officers pointing guns at people and losing their shit, and some supervisors doing phenomenal jobs of controlling that.
Mhm.
And so, with all of that going on and officers being nervous, if you had a bunch of trigger happy officers wanting to hurt people, man, there sure is a good location to do it.
No, you're 100% right on that. And they had a freebie every single day,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't take it. And that just shows you what kind of men and women that you have over there, what kind of leadership that y'all were providing that wasn't out there. And I'm glad that you said that, because that's something that I learned when John spoke that time. The amount of rounds that the officers were taking with no, that the media never reported that. That was some of now, and also I'll remember he did say every media outlet got that information.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just CNN.
Mm-mm.
Your conservative stations got the same information, and for whatever reason, it wasn't reported either, and that's not okay. It's not okay to who's winning in that? Who's winning in that? Nobody. Nobody's there. The media ratings, the that's the people that won because it was a hot topic. It was a hot item, and they didn't want to cool it off.
And I would tell you this. This is recommendation, and I think we've learned something. I mean, obviously, John talks about it, Kenny talks about it, Mike talks about it, all those guys talk about it, but we learned some stuff. One of the things early on I wanted to say and kind of tried to get done, and it just didn't happen. Day 3, day 4. I got back on day 4, I think it was, and I was talking with Colonel Durkis at the time. I think he was a major, maybe, or a captain. But I was talking to him about this stuff, and I said, "Hey, we need to embed the media with law enforcement." And the problem was it was so dangerous that they couldn't. But had we, and in the future, I recommend this, have the media looking out, not in, right? In other words, if you're embedded with law enforcement and they're in the top of the Bearcat and they're taking fire and they're getting piss thrown on them and they're getting bottles and Molotov cocktails thrown, I think their perspective changes. We had my son's a law enforcement officer now. He's a detective, but we had more civil unrest. It's been probably 2.5 years ago now, all related to some verdict somewhere. I don't remember. But I told my guys, I said, listen to me very carefully. If I walk outside my station and a guy's standing there with a burning bottle of gasoline in his hand and he's about to throw it on me, what level of force am I allowed to use? What level of force can I use? Lethal.
Deadly in my book.
In everybody's book. That's an assault first. That is if a guy takes a bottle of flaming liquid, lights it on fire, and throws it at you as a person, we would charge that guy with assault first, right? Why is it okay to do that to police? Why can you get what world do we live in now where people think, hey, I could point a gun and shoot a cop? At the end of the day, all I want to see is us hold people accountable, period. I don't, whether they're law enforcement, hold them accountable. If they're bad guys, hold them accountable. If they're peaceful protesters, look, we all swear to uphold and support the Constitution of the United States. We all do, and we all believe in it. When you pick up a brick and you throw it at someone's head, that's not in the Constitution. You don't have a constitutional right to do that. When you light something on fire and throw it at a person, as soon as you pick that up and light it on fire, you have lost your constitutional right to peacefully congregate, assemble, and have a peaceful gathering. That becomes illegal. And the message we have to send to people is we can't tolerate that in this country any longer. And at the end of the day, and this is the part that bothers me kind of the most because I grew up in these communities. At the end of the day, who's hurt by this? I mean, at the end of the day, what town gets destroyed? Ferguson, Missouri gets destroyed. The diverse community of Ferguson. You know whose gas station gets burned down? The people that live there and need the gas station. You know whose grocery store gets looted and the people that need their groceries. It's not okay for that to be the way things happen. We lost a police officer, a gentleman I worked for years ago, David Dorn. He was shot and killed in riots that occurred. I want to say it's like pre-COVID, so 5 years ago maybe. His wife goes around and talks about it. She was also a police sergeant in the city of St. Louis. David was a retired police captain, and they were having looting and rioting, and he was helping to respond as a security officer. He was retired. He was just helping out a friend that owned a business, and he went into a business where someone was looting, and they shot and murdered him. And for people to think that it's okay to do those things and act that way, there's something wrong with society in that regard. And everybody, black, white, Hispanic, I don't care. We all have to stand up and say, enough's enough with that.
Right. So I'll comment on, no, they do not have a constitutional right to do that. But the policeman has a constitutional right to protect himself when you do. So when you choose to throw that Molotov cocktail, when you choose to throw a brick at a police officer's head, you're choosing to get killed. You absolutely are choosing to get killed. What I say is, don't pray for rain and cry when your feet get muddy. We got to quit. We got to quit thinking that's okay. Well, that is, they don't have a constitutional right, but, and I think that gets brought up, but what's not getting brought up enough is the constitutional rights of not just law enforcement officers, of any citizen to protect themselves against this nonsense, against this unnecessary acts. Hey man, go do your protest, but that's not what a protest is. And we have got to stop allowing that. So Brother Steve, I've taken enough of your time. I know you're busy up there doing some good work for us up there in DC. Anything you'd like to add in closing?
No, I just appreciate what you're doing. And you know, I would say this to anybody who sees this and sees any of your blogging, and hopefully you get bigger and better and get more voice. And we have got to come together. We have got to stop letting people divide us. And the support, by the way, I believe this. I tell my officers this. I know for a fact, regardless of race, regardless of color, the majority of people support law enforcement. They do. And we need good men and women to become police officers. And like, you know, society's cyclical. And I believe that pendulum is now swinging the other way. And I pray to God that it comes quicker than later, because society needs the men and women in blue and brown. You know, we need law enforcement officers. God bless them. I hope they all stay safe. I hope you stay safe. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to hang out, which I miss that face. And
oh man, well, you
I
know,
like
you're
the
welcome.
fact you got that perfect head on your shoulders.
Well, you know, the not that it means anything to anybody else, but in the book of James McGee, the highest honor, high status is you're a good fucking dude. Steve Lewis, you are a good fucking dude.
Thanks, brother.
I'm proud of know you. I'm proud of to be your friend, and I'm so proud that you're still fighting the fight, and that you're willing to do the things that you're doing this late in your career, and you're willing to be that voice and be that guy. So we'll have you on anytime you want to. I'll get in contact with you about Two Finger Tuesday. I know you'd love to see Joe and Tom.
Absolutely.
So until then, McGee and Lewis are out.